GRL's Victory Vault, where we dive into the stories behind the cases that have made a significant impact on our clients' lives. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of GRL's Victory Vault, where we dive into the stories behind the cases that have made a significant impact in our clients' lives. I'm Grant Granestad. Today I've got with me Scott Michels, partner here at GRL Law, who fought vigorously on behalf of a client who was wrongfully accused of sexually assaulting a family friend's daughter years after the alleged assault allegedly occurred. A conviction for this would have had devastating effects for the client and his family. So we're going to talk about that today. So welcome, Scott.
Glad to be here.
So let's just dive right in here. Let's get a little background on the case. Tell us what happened, what the allegations were, how you became involved.
So I originally got involved. Client called our office. He was being investigated for it. Law enforcement wanted to interview him. In my standard procedure, when I find out that there's a potential sex abuse case, is you're not talking to law enforcement. So we advised him he would not be talking to him or to officers. From there, eventually he was charged. He got charged with sex abuse in the second degree, which is a Class B felony. And basically what we ended up finding out was the allegations. The client was about 67 years old at the time law enforcement contacted him and he was charged. The allegations were from about 17 years prior, where a family member or a family friend's daughter claimed that he digitally penetrated her in a swimming pool during a pool party where there were anywhere from 50 to 100 people around the pool at the time that this supposedly took place. And originally, allegations got made about 10 years after the alleged incident. However, the allegations came up, like they were just brought up to the church. And so the church kind of dealt with it. And then roughly 7 years later, the complaining witness goes to law enforcement and makes the allegations to them. However, the allegations were a little bit different than they were 10 years prior. When they were originally brought up to the church, basically the consensus between around everybody, all the witnesses involved except for the complaining witness's father, was that our client allegedly touched her butt while throwing her around in the pool. The allegations, obviously 17 years after the fact, were that he supposedly digitally penetrated her while they were both in the pool with everybody either in the pool or around the pool. Okay. So drastic change.
So the story's changed over that time period. Allegations got worse.
Yep.
And the kind of the dynamic between the accuser and the accused was friends with this person's dad, right?
Correct.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about those allegations. And we're talking 10 years later, 17 years later. How can a person be accused years later of something? We talk a lot about statute of limitations and when they've got to bring charges by and that kind of thing. So tell me how somebody can be accused that long after something like this allegedly happens.
Well, and different charges have different statute of limitations. Sex abuse has changed a lot over the years. It used to be like 10 years or 15 years, something like that. Now, a few years ago, the legislature made a change when it comes to sex abuse involving a person who's under a victim under the age of 18, that there is no statute of limitations for those cases. So 17, 20, 30, 40 years later, somebody can still be accused and charged with a sex offense as long as the alleged victim was under the age of 18 at the time that it happened.
Okay. So as long as they're under 18, they can make the allegation at any point.
Correct.
Okay. And that's something that's set by the legislature. They determine how long that statute of limitations is.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess their mindset is that they're trying to protect kids and being able to report later on in their life.
Yeah. I mean, there's when you get involved in these types of cases where minors are, especially where minors are involved, a lot of the state's expert witnesses will testify that, they may not disclose, for multiple years, because they're either ashamed, embarrassed, or don't understand what happens. And I think that's kind of the basis for the legislature's decision to have no statute of limitations. One of the things I kind of learned through this is not only is it hard for a defense attorney to defend a case that's brought 17, 20 years later, it's hard for a prosecutor as well, because the main problem is people don't remember things with that much clarity. I mean, for myself, I can't remember what I did 2 weeks ago, let alone 17 years ago. So it makes it really hard for witnesses to remember and recall events, and it's a problem for both sides.
Sure.
in these cases.
And it's got to be stressful on the person who's getting accused, this long afterwards, right? You got this hanging over your head. Share with us kind of what the client was looking at if they got convicted. What kind of penalties they're looking at, what kind of effects it has on them if they do get convicted.
Yeah, so sex abuse second is a Class B felony. It's punishable by 25 years in prison, and you have to serve.
And is that mandatory prison time?
It's a mandatory prison, so there's no option. If he was convicted of sex abuse second, the judge has no option other than to sentence him to prison, and it's an indeterminate sentence not to exceed 25 years. However, it's also a 70%er, so you have to serve 70% of that 25 years before you can even be considered for parole. So you're talking 17 and a half years. And with him being 67 years old, if he makes
a death
it,
sentence, effectively, he's going to spend probably the rest of his life in prison or pretty close to it.
Yeah, pretty much. And if by chance he does get out of prison, he's going to be on a special sentence parole for the rest of his life. So he's going to be supervised for the rest of his life. And there's rules that go along with that as far as, who you can be around, where you can go, things like that.
Where you can live.
Who you can live with. So for him, he wouldn't have been able to be around his grandkids unsupervised. Unsupervised. He would not have, been able to go to their school events and all that type of stuff. Additionally, he had been on the sex offender registry for the remainder of his life. So, really huge consequences for him, on top of, the prison stuff of where you're away from your family and friends and that type of stuff. But even if he would have got out, it was going to have, lifetime effects for him. Sure. Moving forward.
And just the label of being, a convicted sex offender.
Correct.
Right? So I don't want to get into necessarily exquisite detail, but kind of walk me through. I guess let me ask you this first. No other allegations that he'd ever done anything like this before?
No. So
this one allegation, one person making one allegation could effectively ruin the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Kind of walk me through the journey of trying the case. How did this kind of unfold?
So this was a really messed up case. If going back and looking at it, originally when the allegations get brought, the case kind of goes through its normal progression of initial appearance, arraignment. Wasn't too long after arraignment, the assistant county attorney actually filed a motion to dismiss the case.
Due to lack of evidence or lack of ability to think that they could get a conviction in this case,
Yeah.
basically? Okay.
Essentially, basically, I think if I remember correctly, they said that the complaining witness hadn't reached out to them, the prosecutor, so they were going to go ahead and dismiss it.
So they didn't really believe in their own case even?
Correct.
Okay.
However, that same day, the assistant county attorney filed the motion to dismiss. The head county attorney filed a motion to withdraw that motion to dismiss. Turns out he was friends with the complaining witness's dad, and so he filed to have that withdrawn. And then ultimately, the case ended up going to the Attorney General's office because of that conflict of interest. And so the Attorney General's office was the one who ended up prosecuting it. Approximately a year and a half later, the case ends up going to trial. It ended up being about a week-long trial where we had, basically the complaining witness and her family coming in and testifying, and then our client and his wife and a bunch of their, the witnesses from the church who were made aware of the original allegations testifying. And then ultimately, within a couple hours of the jury getting the case, they came back with a not guilty verdict.
Okay. So I think there was some circumstances around the actual allegation coming out, right? So, or kind of why maybe it wasn't super believable. Share with me a little bit about the circumstances of her actually reporting it, saying this is what happened.
Yeah, so through kind of our investigation, what we ended up finding out, and this stuff was all confirmed by all the witnesses, that originally at the 10-year mark when she first came forward with allegations, she was kind of a rebellious teenager. She had taken the family vehicle and gone across state lines with it, had also stolen or taken her dad's credit card and racked some bills up on it. So dad was in the process of, he was going to call the cops. And so then she comes forward with this allegation. Our position was she was deflecting from herself, from her wrongdoing. And then, like I said, those allegations ended up going to the church. Nothing comes of it. Nobody wants to go to law enforcement. And then roughly 7 years later, kind of what we gathered, there was some she had later married. There were some marital problems, stuff like that. Then these new allegations come forward. So that was kind of what we gathered through, our investigation of the case. A lot of that stuff ended up being confirmed, by all the parties involved.
So when the heat was on the complaining witness, the allegations kind of would come out, sort of deflect from maybe some of her own personal issues.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I found interesting was that this was alleged to have happened at a pool party. You said 50 to 100 people.
Yeah, nobody could really say how many people were there, but it was a big pool party, and
people around the pool watching the kids, assumedly, right?
Yeah, you have, I don't know, 30 kids approximately that are swimming in the pool, and you got parents all sitting around the edge of the pool, keeping, like being hawks, watching their kids, because you're talking anywhere from probably 4 or 5 years old up to 15, 16 years old. Kids swimming around in there. You got parents in there, playing with the kids, throwing kids around in the pool. They're grilling out. It's a big event. And this thing, this allegation supposedly happens there with all these people. And, kind of the other crazy thing about the allegations were that she claims he digitally penetrated her. She would have been 8 or 9 at the time. And then, but she doesn't yell, she doesn't scream doesn't make a scene. She just ends up swimming off, and it didn't ring as it didn't pass the smell test when we're looking at it.
Sure. And obviously the jury agreed with that.
Correct.
Obviously these are really difficult cases. We're talking about a sexual assault of a kid, but we're also talking about somebody's liberty, being at stake here. Difficult case, as you said, for a defense attorney, difficult case for a prosecutor. Reflecting on this case a little bit, tell me some lessons or some insights or something that you gained as an attorney or just as a person throughout this process.
And it's just, nobody ever wants to hear about allegations of any sexual abuse, but let alone against a child. And so that's why they're difficult to deal with on our level, because obviously we don't agree with,
Yeah, we definitely don't condone
we don't
sexual
condone that.
assault of anybody.
Right. But when you start looking at these types of cases and you start seeing all it takes is one person's story that can completely ruin somebody's life, and not only their life, but the rest of their family, because if you get convicted of that, not only do you have that scarlet letter, everybody else in the family, they get that reflection as well. So that's the kind of the thing that I always see from these types of cases is just it only takes one person's story to potentially completely ruin not only one person but multiple people's lives. And this too was a very contentious case because you had all these people were friends, and then when this stuff comes forward, then you got the fractions, the whole group fractions off, and you got some people siding with one side, some siding with the other, and it was a deal too where I've never had a jury ask that everybody else remain in the courtroom until they were allowed to completely leave the courthouse area. So I think they could sense, how contentious it was too.
Difficult for everybody, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, I appreciate you coming in today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Obviously, the thought of an adult sexually assaulting a child is a terrible thought.
Yeah.
But the thought of a person being wrongfully accused of sexually assaulting a child and being convicted and sent to prison is equally a devastating thought. So great work to you, Scott, for clearing your client's name. And a big thank you to our listeners for tuning in today and joining us. Be sure, if you are enjoying this, to leave a review, and tune in for our next episode of GRL's Victory Vault as we explore more impactful cases. Until then, take care.